The universe did not scream when the Ark ship Odyssey died. It simply went quiet. There was no grand explosion, no final, defiant broadcast crackling across the void. One moment, the Generation ship was a beacon of light and hope, a self-sustaining world carrying the genetic legacy of old Earth and 250,000 souls toward a new star. The next, it was a ghost. A single, perfect sphere of absolute blackness hung where the Odyssey had been, a hole punched in space-time that did not reflect light, did not emit radiation, and did not permit escape. It was a scar of non-existence, and at its periphery, the light of distant galaxies seemed to bend in mourning. The attack, if it could be called that, was silent, elegant, and final. The culprits were a phantom species humanity had designated the Glimmer, a name born of the shimmering, aurora-like energy signatures their fleets left in their wake. Like oil on water, they had never communicated, never made demands, never revealed their form. They simply appeared, erased, and vanished. For 3 decades, their strikes had been limited to remote outposts, automated resource drones, and unmanned survey probes' annoyances, cosmic vandalism that the interstellar Concordat logged with bureaucratic detachment. The Odyssey was different. It was not a military target or piece of infrastructure. It was a promise, a 4-generation-long dream of expansion and survival. And its erasure was not an act of war. It was a statement of cosmic philosophy. It was a declaration that humanity and its noisy, chaotic, and ambitious existence was a flaw in the universe that required correction. Back on Earth, the news arrived not as a bang, but as a cessation. The Odyssey's daily quantum-entangled signal, a steady pulse of life signs, status reports, and children's laughter that had been a constant for 98 years, simply stopped. The silence that followed was heavier than any message of destruction could ever be. In the hallowed halls of the Concordat on Geneva Prime, Xeno-ambassadors from a dozen species offered measured condolences and proposed the formation of yet another subcommittee to investigate the incident. They spoke of caution, of de-escalation, of the unknown variables. They did not understand. Humanity was not a species that responded to existential threats with committees. Its history was forged in fire and survival, and deep in the dormant genes of every human being, from the bureaucrats in their climate-controlled towers to the asteroid miners in the Kuiper Belt. An ancient and terrible instinct was stirring, the instinct to not merely survive, but to answer an obliteration with an even greater one. Dr. Eris Thorne felt the silence before she understood it. She was standing in the Soul Archive, surrounded by the digitized memories of 100 billion lives. When the ambient hum of the facility's deep space comms relay faltered, a single red light, ignored for a century, began to blink on a forgotten console. Signal loss, Arksha Odyssey. Her breath caught in her throat. Her sister, Alara, was the chief botanist on the Odyssey. Her nephew, Leo, had been born among its manufactured stars, had never known the feel of real gravity or the sight of an open sky. Eris had spent her life studying the minds of aliens, writing treatises on non-carbon-based communication and the psychology of hive civilizations. She was the architect of the first contact accords, a document that preached patience and understanding above all else. She believed, with academic certainty, that all intelligent life could eventually be understood, that all conflict was born of miscommunication, the silent, Blinking red light was the universe's rebuttal to her life's work. 2 hours later, they came for her. Not diplomats, but soldiers. Fleet Marshal Cade, a man whose face looked like it had been carved from granite and left out in the solar wind, stood in the doorway of her sterile apartment. He didn't bother with pleasantries. "The Concordat is drafting a resolution of censure," he said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the floor. "They'll debate for a year while the Glimmer erases another colony. We don't have a year. We have now." Eris stared at him, her mind a maelstrom of grief and cold, analytical rage, her diplomatic protocols, her belief in peaceful outreach. Felt like a child's fairy tale in the face of that perfect, silent sphere of nothingness where her family used to be. "What do you want from me, Marshal?" she asked, her voice devoid of the warmth it had once held. "You spent 20 years trying to understand how aliens think," Cade replied. "Stepping inside, I need you to tell me how this one dies. The Concordat has forbidden any punitive military action, so, officially, the human expeditionary fleet is on a long-range survey mission. Unofficially," he gestured to the datapad in his hand. A single directive was displayed on its screen, Operation Memento Mori. "You've been given command of the Retribution Fleet. Your academic background has been reclassified. As of this moment, you are Strategist General Thorne, and your sole objective is to ensure the Glimmer become a footnote in Zen archaeological texts." The promotion was a farce, a piece of political theater to give her the authority she needed without formally breaking Concordat law. She was a civilian in a military machine, a scalpel being handed to men who only knew how to wield hammers. She knew they didn't trust her, but they were desperate. The Glimmer were unlike anything they had ever faced, and their tactics defied conventional military logic. They didn't conquer, they didn't pillage, they didn't communicate, they erased. And to fight an enemy like that, they needed a mind that could think like that, a mind that could comprehend the incomprehensible. Eris looked from Cade's unyielding face to the blinking red light on her own console, a tiny star memorializing 250,000 dead. The academic in her was screaming, recoiling from the barbarism of it all, but the sister, the aunt, the human, said only one word. "When do I start?" The flagship of the Secret Fleet was the HFS Stellark's Lament, a vessel that should not have existed. It was a ghost ship, built in the dark of the Oort cloud, its construction hidden from Concordat oversight. It was a monument to humanity's inherent paranoia. While the rest of the galaxy talked of peace and cooperation, humanity had been preparing for the day the talking stopped. The Lament was not a ship of exploration or defense. It was a predator. Its hull was forged from a tungsten adamantium composite that absorbed sensor scans, rendering it nearly invisible. Its primary weapon was not a laser or a missile bank, but a graviton lance, a theoretical weapon capable of shearing space-time itself. And its most guarded secret was its engine, the Echo Drive. Unlike standard FTL drives that tore a brute force corridor through hyperspace, the Echo Drive folded space in on itself, allowing for instantaneous, untraceable jumps to multiple locations at once. A ship equipped with it could appear to be in a dozen star systems simultaneously, a fleet of phantoms designed to sow chaos and paranoia. It was a weapon of psychological terror as much as physical destruction, and Eris Thorne understood its purpose immediately. Standing on the bridge of the Lament, surrounded by the quiet hum of lethal technology and the stony faces of a command crew who viewed her with suspicion, she felt a grim sense of belonging. The bridge was not a place of comfort. It was a cold, dark cathedral of vengeance. All muted lighting and tactical displays glowing in blood red and ice blue. Her second-in-command, Commander Valerius, was a product of the military machine Cade championed, stoic, disciplined, and utterly contemptuous of her civilian background. The glimmer left no debris, no energy signature, no wreckage. Valerius stated during their first briefing, his voice clipped and precise as he gestured to a holographic display of the black sphere where the Odyssey had been. Standard analysis is impossible. We have nothing to track, nothing to study. The other officers murmured in agreement. They saw a dead end. Aris saw a message. She stepped forward, her plain gray jumpsuit a stark contrast to their decorated naval uniforms. "You're wrong." "Commander," she said, her voice cutting through the low chatter. "They left us everything we need to know." She manipulated the hologram, zooming in on the edge of the sphere, where starlight bent unnaturally. This isn't the result of a bomb or a torpedo. A conventional weapon leaves a signature radiation. Shrapnel. A thermal bloom. This is a containment field. A perfect one. The energy required to create and sustain a null space-time event of this magnitude is astronomical. It's inefficient. It's ostentatious. It's a demonstration. She looked around the room, meeting the skeptical eyes of the career soldiers. They didn't just destroy the Odyssey, they unmade it, piece by piece, atom by atom. And they did it in a way that would leave a permanent, inexplicable scar. Why not to hide their tracks, but to make a statement? They're not just destroying us, they're teaching us. Valerius scoffed. Teaching us how to die? No. Aris countered, her gaze unwavering. They are teaching us the rules of their game. Rule 1, brute force, is irrelevant. Rule 2, existence is a privilege, not a right. They see themselves as cosmic gardeners, pruning the weeds. They didn't attack our fleet or our military bases because they don't perceive them as the threat. They attacked the Odyssey because it represented uncontrolled growth, expansion, the future. That's what they fear. She pointed to a series of smaller, older glimmer strikes on the star chart to the remote outposts, the survey drones. These weren't random acts of vandalism. They were experiments. They were testing our response times, our sensor capabilities, our adherence to concordant protocols. They've been studying us for 30 years, learning our weaknesses. They know we are shackled by a bureaucracy that values debate over action. They believe we are predictable. A grim silence settled over the briefing room. Eris had reframed the enemy from a mindless force of nature into a cold, calculating intelligence. An intelligence that had grossly underestimated one crucial aspect of the human psyche. They are methodical, patient, and precise. Eris continued, her voice dropping to a near whisper. They will have a staging ground, a hidden base somewhere. They believe we would never look. A place to observe, to plan their next move. That is where we will find them. They expect a diplomatic protest. They expect a task force to be assembled a year from now. They do not expect the Stellarch's lament. They do not expect the Echo Drive. And they do not expect us. She turned to face Valerius directly, her eyes as cold as the void outside. They think they're the gardeners. We're going to be the fire. Her plan, presented to Marshal Cade and the Hidden Council of Human High Command, was met with stunned silence. It was not a proposal for a reconnaissance mission or a defensive patrol. It was a blueprint for a decapitation strike. She had cross-referenced the Glimmer's experimental strikes with anomalous dark matter readings and subtle gravitational distortions that had been dismissed by concorded astronomers as sensor ghosts. Her analysis pointed to a single location, a rogue nebula of proto-matter on the edge of charted space, a place so chaotic and violent that no ship would ever enter it willingly. It was the perfect hiding place. She named her plan Memento Mori, remember you must die. It was a message intended not for humanity, but for the Glimmer. Aris proposed using the Echo Drive to make a single, precise jump not just into the nebula, but inside it, bypassing any external sensors or patrols. The entire Retribution fleet would materialize in the heart of the enemy's sanctuary. They would have 1 hour to identify the primary Glimmer command structure, deploy the Graviton Lance, and annihilate it before the enemy could mount a coordinated response. The risks were immense. A miscalculation in the jump could scatter the fleet across 1,000,000 light-years or materialize them inside a star. The Graviton Lance had never been fired at full power. It could tear a hole in their own reality as easily as the enemy's. It was an audacious, insane, and utterly brutal plan. It was perfect. Marshal Cade looked at the tactical display, then at the cold, determined face of the woman he had pulled from academic obscurity. He saw no fear, no hesitation. He only saw the ghost of a murdered family and the birth of a weapon he had never anticipated. He had wanted a strategist. He had forged an executioner. The Concordat will have our heads for this. Thorn, he said, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. Only if we fail. Marshal. Aris replied without blinking. The order was given. Aboard the Stellarch's Lament. The crew moved with a newfound purpose. The suspicion in their eyes had been replaced by a grim respect. Aris Thorn was no longer the civilian outsider. She was the architect of their rage. As she took her place on the command throne, the ship around her came alive. A low thrum vibrated through the deck as the Echo Drive began to spool, its cryo-pumps whining as they flooded the core with liquid helium. The lights on the bridge dimmed, and the main view screen dissolved into a swirling vortex of mathematical equations and shimmering spatial coordinates. Commander Valerius stood at his station, his earlier animosity replaced by a quiet intensity. "All ships report green for Echo Jump," he announced, his voice steady. "Targeting solution locked on your coordinates. General." Aris looked out at the starfield, at the familiar constellations of human space, knowing they were about to leave it all behind. They were plunging into a darkness from which they might never return, all for the chance to land a single, devastating blow. The grief for her sister and nephew was still there, a cold, dense star in the center of her being, but it was no longer a source of pain. It was fuel. It was clarity. She thought of the Glimmer, the silent, elegant gardeners of the cosmos. They had made one fatal error in their calculations, one variable they had failed to account for in their 30 years of study. When you try to prune humanity, it doesn't just grow back, it grows teeth. "Engage," she commanded, her voice the only sound in the sudden, absolute silence of the bridge. The universe outside the view screen fractured, splintered into 1,000,000 shards of light and color. And then, like the Glimmer themselves, the Stellarch's Lament and the 50 warships of the Retribution fleet simply ceased to be there. They had gone to deliver their reply. The universe snapped back into existence with a concussive jolt that rattled the Stellarch's Lament to its core. But there was no roar of atmospheric entry, no clang of hulls. Only the sudden, absolute silence of deep space. One moment, the bridge was a kaleidoscope of fracturing light and screaming algorithms. The next, it was a tableau of frozen dread. Commander Valerius was the first to regain his composure, his hand gripping the edge of his console until his knuckles were white. "Status report," he barked, his voice cutting through the ringing silence. Lieutenant Yorvin, the navigation officer, swore under his breath, eyes glued to his flickering display. "Sensors. They're going wild. Commander, gravitational anomalies. Protomatter density readings off the charts. We're deep inside the nebula. Sir, exactly on coordinates. But it's a living storm out here." Eris Thorne, strapped into the command chair, felt a primal chill deeper than the cold of space itself. The main view screen, which moments before had shown a churning chaos of calculations, now resolved into a scene of impossible, terrifying beauty. They were suspended in a vast, swirling ocean of what appeared to be pure potentiality, iridescent clouds of gas and dust, shot through with veins of shimmering, ethereal energy. It was a cosmic womb, alive with nascent stars and the raw material of creation. And it was utterly, profoundly alien. There were no stars, only the self-luminescence of the nebula itself, painting everything in shades of deep violet, electric blue, and a terrifying, vibrant green. This was the Rogue Nebula, the so-called Hollow Veil, a place no human vessel had ever willingly entered. It was breathtaking, and in its beauty, Eris sensed the cold, patient mind of the glimmer. "Passive sensors only," Eris ordered, her voice calm despite the frantic hammering of her heart. "No active pings. No emissions beyond life support. Valerius, put all ships into maximum stealth. This isn't a hiding place, Commander. It's a fortress." The fleet, 50 warships strong, hung like motes of dust in the cosmic kaleidoscope, their stealth systems absorbing even the ambient light of the nebula, rendering them utterly invisible. Yet Aris knew, deep in her gut, that they had already been seen. The glimmer didn't rely on conventional sensors. They felt the universe, manipulated it with a will that transcended mere technology. The first sign came not from a blip on a radar, but from a whisper in reality itself. On the fringe of their formation, one of the stealth corvettes, the HFS Phantom's blade, began to distort. It didn't explode. It didn't even register a hit. Its image on the tactical display simply stretched. The vessel elongated, its perfectly rendered hull bending like soft plastic, its internal systems screaming in silent alarm before the ship, and everything within it collapsed into a point of impossible density. A single, perfect black sphere, identical to the one that had consumed the Odyssey, appeared for a microsecond where the Phantom's blade had been, then vanished, leaving no trace. 250,000 souls, gone. Again. The bridge crew stared, horrified. There was no enemy, no weapon, just the silent, elegant act of erasure. What in God's name was that Lieutenant Desai? The tactical officer gasped, her face pale. No energy signature, no gravitational spike. It just unmade itself. Valerius's jaw was tight. "They hit us, General." But how there was no warning, no indication. Eris's eyes narrowed, fixed on the shimmering protomatter where the Phantom's blade had been. "That wasn't an attack, Commander. It was an environmental correction." The Phantom's blade registered as an anomaly in their domain, a foreign body. They didn't target it, they simply removed it. This nebula isn't just their hiding place, it's an extension of their will. They are creating null space pockets, localized singularities, to purge anything they deem extraneous. We aren't fighting ships. Valerius. We're fighting a living landscape. The implications were terrifying. Every ship, every human, was an intrusion into an enemy whose very presence warped reality. Their conventional weapons, designed for kinetic impact and energy dispersal, might be utterly useless against an enemy that could simply undo their existence. Then how do we find their core? Valerius asked, his voice laced with the first hint of doubt Eris had heard from him. How do we strike a target that can simply unmake our existence? With a thought, Eris looked at the tactical display, at the swirling chaos of the nebula, at the ghost images of her fleet, now vulnerable in their supposed invisibility. They are showing us the rules of their existence, she reiterated, her mind racing, connecting disparate data points from 3 decades of Glimmer incidents. Every erasure they've conducted has been perfect, absolute, without residue. It requires immense, coordinated energy. This isn't random. It's an ordered process, a system, and every system has a heart. She pointed to the shifting patterns of protomatter on the main view screen. They are using the nebula's raw material to generate these null space events. The energy pulses, the gravitational ripples. They're not random static. They are the echoes of a vast, distributed consciousness at work. We can't track their ships because they don't have ships in the conventional sense. They are the environment, but their actions, their acts of correction, create disturbances in their own perfectly ordered reality. Those disturbances, those imperfections, are our breadcrumbs. Her plan was audacious, bordering on suicidal. They would not use active sensors, which would immediately give away their position. Instead, they would deploy a swarm of ghost drones, tiny, sub-light probes designed for passive data collection. These drones, barely larger than a human hand, were equipped with hypersensitive gravimetric sensors and quantum-entangled comms, linked directly to the Lament's central AI, named Ariadne. Their mission to drift silently through the protomatter, mapping the subtle, almost imperceptible shifts in reality caused by the Glimmer's consciousness, not looking for ships, but for intent. The Glimmer are shaping reality. Eris explained to a skeptical Valerius, they don't just exist within the nebula. They are the nebula. Every null space event, every distortion, is a thought, an action. We are going to map their thoughts. Valerius, ever the pragmatist, raised a brow. Map their thoughts with all due respect. General, our drones aren't built for telepathy. They're not. Aris conceded. But a thought, when it's powerful enough to warp space-time, leaves a residue. A perfect act of erasure is still an act, and every act has a point of origin. We are looking for the point where their will is strongest, where their consciousness is most dense. That will be their core. Over the next 12 hours, the Stellarch's Lament became a silent, brooding mothership, birthing hundreds of thousands of ghost drones into the iridescent chaos. They fanned out, a shimmering, unseen cloud, each one a tiny node in a vast, distributed sensor network, feeding raw data back to Ariadne. The first few hours were agonizingly slow. Drones simply vanished, caught in unseen null space currents, their last telemetry reports showing only a sudden, violent cessation of existence. Panic began to ripple through the fleet. Another destroyer, the HFS Vigilance, registered a catastrophic hull breach on its port side. Then its life signs flatlined. No explosion, no visible assailant, just a sudden tearing of its very fabric. A clean, surgical removal by an unseen hand. The bridge crew of the Lament watched, helpless, as their comrades were simply unmade. "They're adapting," Valerius growled, his hand hovering over the active sensor button. "They're learning our positions from the drones. We need to withdraw, General, before they take out the entire fleet." Aris shook her head, her eyes fixed on the evolving holographic map. "No, they're not adapting to our positions. They're adapting to our method. They're sensing the intrusion of the drones and adjusting their environmental purging. They're still not targeting us. They're still just trying to maintain the purity of their domain, which means their core remains undisturbed by our presence." She pointed to a faint, rhythmic pulse emerging from the noise on the map. It was not a conventional energy signature, but a complex wave of gravimetric and protomatter resonance. "That's it," she whispered. "That's the heartbeat." Ariadne, the Lament's AI, had been working tirelessly, sifting through quadrillions of data points from the ghost drones. It had begun to identify patterns, not in the direct movements of an enemy, but in the subtle, synchronous fluctuations of the nebula itself. It was like listening to the quiet, internal conversation of a vast, alien mind. "General, the resonance patterns are converging," Ariadne's calm, synthesized voice announced. Extrapolating origin point with 97.4% confidence, on the main view screen, the swirling protomatter began to resolve, not into a physical object, but into a central locus of intense, perfectly synchronized energy. It was a sphere within a sphere within a sphere, each layer shimmering with a different, almost musical frequency. It was vast, easily the size of a small moon, yet utterly weightless, composed entirely of organized protomatter held together by sheer, focused will. It was not a mechanical construct, nor was it biological in any sense humanity understood. It was a crystalline lattice of pure thought, a nexus of consciousness that formed the very fabric of the nebula. This was the Glimmer's core, not a command center, but a consciousness so vast it was the command. This was the mind that perceived humanity as a weed, the will that orchestrated the elegant, silent erasures. It was breathtaking in its alien beauty, terrifying in its implicit power. "My God," Valerius breathed, staring at the impossible construct. "It's a living thought. It's their central nervous system," Eris corrected, a grim determination hardening her features. "A distributed consciousness so vast that it projects its will onto the protomatter of the nebula itself. Every erasure we've witnessed has been an extension of this central node. It feels us, Commander, not through sensors, but through its very being. We are a disruptive frequency in its song of creation." The revelation was profound. They weren't fighting an army. They were fighting a philosophy made manifest, an intelligence that believed it had the right to prune the universe of unwanted life. And now, that intelligence knew they were here. The nebula, once a passive swirl of color, began to subtly shift. The iridescent clouds thickened, swirling into vortexes of protomatter that moved with unnatural speed, converging on the human fleet. Gravitational eddies intensified, threatening to tear ships apart. The Glimmer were no longer just correcting the environment. They were actively reshaping it to trap and crush the intruders. The fortress was waking up. "General, the Glimmer are closing in," Valerius reported, his voice urgent. "The protomatter density is increasing around our fleet. They're not attacking with weapons. They're trying to crush us with the nebula itself. We're losing maneuverability." Aris knew this was the moment of truth. They had found the core, but now they were vulnerable, surrounded by an enemy that commanded reality itself. "Full power to structural integrity fields," Aris commanded. "All ships, maintain formation." Valerius, "Plot a direct vector to the core. We're going in." The Stellarch's lament, followed by its remaining fleet, began a slow, agonizing crawl through the tightening embrace of the nebula. The pressure on the hulls was immense, groaning metal protesting against the invisible forces trying to tear them apart. Warning lights flickered across the bridge. Structural integrity at 70% and falling, Yorvin shouted. "We can't hold this for long." General Aris ignored him, her gaze fixed on the shimmering thought lattice, now so close it filled the view screen. The Glimmer core pulsed with a calm, serene energy, utterly unaware of the destruction it was about to face, or perhaps utterly dismissive. It saw them as an annoyance, a minor imperfection to be wiped clean. "Prepare the graviton lance," Aris ordered, her voice resonating with cold authority. Valerius looked at her, then back at the approaching target, a conflict in his eyes. He had seen the power of the graviton lance in simulations, but never in reality. It was a weapon of unthinkable force, capable of unmaking space-time, and he knew it was a gamble of everything they had. "General, the graviton lance has never been fired at full charge," he warned. "There's a significant risk of cascade failure, or worse, localized reality collapse around the lament itself." "Understood, Commander," Aris replied, her gaze unwavering from the Glimmer core. "If we fail to destroy this, Earth will face an enemy that can delete entire worlds from existence. The risk is acceptable." The lament shuddered violently as a new wave of protomatter slammed into its shields. Alarms blared. "Shields at 40%, Desai cried. "Pressure on the hull exceeding safety limits. Fire the graviton lance," Aris commanded, her voice a steel blade cutting through the chaos. "Full power. Target the central node." A deep, resonant hum began to build within the Stellarch's lament, a sound that vibrated not just through the ship's deck plates, but through the very bones of the crew. Energy conduits glowed with an impossible, blinding light, straining under the immense power surge. The ship's internal temperature spiked, and the air crackled with ozone. The graviton lance, normally hidden within the lament's forward hull, extended with a slow, mechanical groan, its maw opening like a hungry predator. It pulsed with a contained, swirling vortex of dark energy, drawing protomatter and light into its core. The nebula itself seemed to recoil, the swirling colors momentarily stilling in anticipation of the catastrophic event about to unfold. Valerius, grim-faced, slammed his hand down on the firing console. Graviton lance discharging. The view screen erupted in a blinding flash of pure, concentrated force. It wasn't a beam of light or a projectile. It was a wave of pure space-time distortion, an impossible tearing of the fabric of reality itself. The lance lanced out from the lament, a silent scream of cosmic violence, and slammed directly into the heart of the Glimmer's protomatter core. There was no explosion, no fire, no sound. Instead, the vast, shimmering thought lattice of the Glimmer core simply unraveled. The perfectly synchronized energy pulses flickered, stuttered, and then collapsed. The layers of organized protomatter dissolved, not burning or exploding, but simply losing their coherence, their very being. It was as if a cosmic thread had been pulled, and the intricately woven tapestry of the Glimmer's consciousness began to come undone. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The protomatter vortices that had been crushing the human fleet dissipated. The gravitational eddies vanished. The entire nebula, which had been a hostile, conscious entity, suddenly reverted to a chaotic, swirling cloud of raw, unthinking matter. The pressure on the Lament and its fleet instantly ceased. The Glimmer's core, its vast, intelligent heart, was not merely destroyed. It was undone. It was unmade. A single, perfect black sphere, larger than any before, momentarily appeared where the core had been, a scar of non-existence the size of a planet, then imploded inward, vanishing, taking with it the very concept of the Glimmer's central consciousness. The nebula was quiet once more, a silent, beautiful chaos of stardust and gas, utterly devoid of purpose or will. The Glimmer, the cosmic gardeners, had been pruned by a species they had grossly underestimated. Eris Thorne leaned back in her chair, the weight of 250,000 souls resting heavy on her shoulders. The bridge was silent, save for the rhythmic hum of life support and the stunned breathing of the crew. "Report," she said, her voice hoarse, devoid of triumph. Valerius stared at the now empty view screen, his face a mask of awe and horror. "The core, it's gone. General, completely erased. The nebula is inert. The Glimmer, they're silent." Aris closed her eyes, a single tear tracing a path through the dust on her cheek. The vengeance was sweet, cold, and utterly hollow. They had struck a blow, a devastating act of cosmic surgery. But had they truly won, the Glimmer were a philosophy, an intelligence distributed throughout the cosmos. They had destroyed a single node, a vast brain that powered a single region of space. But somewhere out there, in the boundless, silent void, Eris knew, other Glimmer nodes would still exist. Other consciousnesses would still perceive humanity as a disruptive frequency. The fight was far from over. This was merely the end of the beginning. The silence that followed the Glimmer's unmaking was not one of peace, but of profound and unnerving absence. Where a vast, living consciousness had once imposed its will upon the very fabric of space-time, there was now only a void. The Hollow Veil Nebula, once a fortress of alien thought, had reverted to a chaotic, beautiful, and utterly mindless cloud of cosmic dust. Aboard the HFS Stellars's Lament, the immediate aftermath of the battle was a controlled storm of activity. Damage control teams raced to reinforce the ship's groaning hull, which had been strained to the breaking point by the Glimmer's reality-warping pressures. Energy conduits, still glowing with the residual heat of the Graviton Lance's discharge, were flushed with cryocoolant. The bridge crew, running on adrenaline and sheer disbelief, worked with a quiet, grim efficiency, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of status reports confirming the impossible they had won. Victory, however, felt less like a triumph and more like a reprieve. Commander Valerius, standing beside Eris Thorne's command chair, stared out at the now inert nebula. All Glimmer signatures have vanished. General, he reported, his voice a low monotone that betrayed none of the awe or terror he felt. The fleet is reporting minimal casualties beyond the initial losses of the Phantom's Blade and the Vigilance. We're battered, but we're operational. He paused, turning to face her. You did it. You found their heart, and you cut it out. Eris did not share his sense of finality. She felt a phantom vibration in her skull, a faint, high-frequency hum that had started the moment the graviton lance had fired. She initially dismissed it as a symptom of the immense stress, a neurological aftershock from being in such close proximity to a reality-shattering weapon. But it persisted. A single mournful note played on an instrument she couldn't identify. Did we? Commander, she murmured, her gaze distant. We destroyed a single, powerful node, but the Glimmer were a distributed consciousness. What if we only destroyed a part of them? What if we've only taught them to fear us? Her words hung in the air, a sobering counterpoint to the relief that had begun to spread through the ship. They had come here seeking vengeance for the Odyssey, for 250,000 souls erased from existence. They had delivered a blow of equal, terrible finality. But in doing so, they had mirrored their enemy. They had answered erasure with erasure, silence with silence. The thought was a cold stone in her gut. She, Eris Thorne, the diplomat, the advocate for understanding, had just sanctioned the unmaking of an entire intelligence. The journey back was tense. The fleet moved cautiously, skirting the edges of the nebula, their sensors sweeping the void for any sign of retaliation. But nothing came. The Glimmer were gone, as if they had never existed. The silence was absolute, and it was this perfect absence that unnerved Eris more than any counterattack could. Back in her quarters, the humming in her head grew more distinct. It was no longer a simple tone, but a complex wave of information, a stream of fragmented images and alien concepts that flowed directly into her consciousness. It was the echo of the Glimmer Core's death, a final, catastrophic data burst from a mind trillions of times more complex than her own, imprinted on her own neural pathways by the psychic backlash of the graviton lance. She saw swirling galaxies, not as collections of stars, but as equations of life and entropy. She felt the birth of species as dissonant chords in a cosmic symphony. And she felt a fear so ancient and profound it dwarfed her own grief. It was not the fear of an enemy, but the fear of a guardian failing in its duty. Working in secret with Ariadne, the Lament's AI, she began to treat the psychic echo not as a hallucination, but as a message. She fed the patterns of the neural hum into the AI's xenolinguistic processors, cross-referencing them with the gravimetric resonance data they had collected in the nebula. For 3 days, she barely slept, her mind a bridge between human logic and the dying thoughts of an alien god. Finally, Ariadne spoke, its calm voice a chilling contrast to the horror of its words. The data is coherent, General. I have translated the core concepts of the Glimmer's final transmission. It is not a declaration of war or a curse of vengeance. What is it? Ariadne, Aris whispered, her hands trembling. It is a warning, the AI stated, and it is an apology. The revelation was so staggering, so contrary to everything they believed, that Eris initially refused to accept it. She convened an immediate briefing with Valerius in the ship's sealed strategy room. The holographic display between them showed not enemy formations, but a complex, branching tree of cosmic history, pieced together from the Glimmer's final thoughts. They weren't conquerors, Aris began, her voice strained. They were guardians, a shield, a self-replicating, galaxy-spanning quarantine system. Valerius stared at her, his expression a mixture of confusion and disbelief. A quarantine against what? Us? Aris said, her gaze locking with his. Or rather, what species like us are capable of becoming. The Glimmer's purpose was to identify and prune civilizations that reached a specific technological and philosophical threshold, not out of malice, but out of fear. They called it the Great Filter of Will. She pointed to the holographic display. According to their history, the universe is not empty. It is simply dormant. There are intelligences out there, things left over from previous cosmic cycles, beings of such power that their very consciousness is a threat to reality as we know it. They are sleeping, and the Glimmer believed that certain types of noisy life, species driven by rapid expansion, ambition, and a tendency to manipulate the fundamental forces of the universe, could inadvertently wake them. And the Graviton Lance, Valerius asked, the dawning horror clear on his face, is precisely the kind of technology they feared. Aris confirmed, a weapon that doesn't just destroy matter, but tears at the very substrate of space-time. The Glimmer didn't destroy the Odyssey to punish us. They destroyed it to stop us, to prevent us from ever developing the capability to build a weapon like the Lance. Their experimental strikes on our outposts were tests, designed to gauge our technological trajectory. The Odyssey was the final data point. Its mission of interstellar colonization confirmed their greatest fear that humanity was on the verge of becoming a resonance cascade species, a civilization whose technological footprint was loud enough to disturb the sleepers. A heavy silence filled the room. The entire premise of their mission, their righteous quest for retribution, had been built on a catastrophic misunderstanding. They weren't soldiers avenging an atrocity. They were vandals who had just smashed a priceless alarm system designed to protect the entire galaxy. So, the core we destroyed, Valerius said, his voice barely a whisper, was not a military command. Aris finished for him. It was the linchpin of their quarantine in this galactic quadrant, a vast, sentient filter designed to keep the peace by committing acts of selective, silent genocide. And in its final moments, it wasn't cursing us. It was screaming a warning, because in destroying it with the Graviton Lance, we didn't just break the filter. We sent a shockwave through space-time. We rang a dinner bell for gods. The psychic echo in Aris's mind had now resolved into a single, terrifying concept, a name that the Glimmer had used for the sleeping entities, the architects of silence. The Glimmer had been their unwitting creation, a biological failsafe left behind eons ago. Now, the failsafe was broken. The final part of the Glimmer's message was a set of coordinates, a location deep in the intergalactic void, a place marked by a profound and unnatural absence of cosmic background radiation. It was the location of the nearest sleeper. "We have a choice," Commander Aris said, her voice heavy with the weight of her discovery. "We can report back to High Command. Tell them we've neutralized the Glimmer threat and return home as heroes. We can let them believe the war is over. and wait for whatever is sleeping out there to wake up and finish what the Glimmer started. Valerius finished, his face grim. Or we can honor the last warning of the very species we just annihilated. We can take this fleet, what's left of it, and follow these coordinates. We can find out what we've woken up. He looked at the coordinates, a point of absolute nothingness on the galactic map. It was a suicide mission, a journey into a darkness far more profound than the one they had just faced. They were no longer a fleet of vengeance. They were a desperate, lonely band of guardians, taking up the mantle of the enemy they had slain. "Operation Memento Mori is over," Valerius said, his decision made. He straightened up, his military bearing returning, but his eyes held a new, deeper understanding. "What's our new directive?" General Eris looked at the coordinates, at the ghost of a warning playing out in her mind. Her grief for her sister, for the Odyssey, was now intertwined with a far greater sense of responsibility. They had come seeking retribution, a memory of death for their enemies. Now, they were on a mission to prevent a death of unimaginable scale. "Our new mission is containment," she said, her voice resonating with a newfound, terrible purpose. "We are going to find what is sleeping in the dark, and if we can't put it back to sleep, we are going to make sure it never, ever wakes up." He nodded, then turned to the comms panel. "Helm, lay in a new course. Maximum speed. Destination. Unknown. The Stellaris' Lament." The ship, built as a weapon of ultimate vengeance, turned its back on the familiar stars of home. With its battered but loyal fleet in tow, it plunged into the silent, starless void between galaxies, chasing the ghost of a warning from a dead enemy towards a threat that the universe itself had tried to forget. They were no longer humanity's sword. They had become its shield. The journey into the intergalactic void was a descent into a new kind of silence. The familiar, comforting tapestry of stars thinned, then vanished, replaced by an unnerving, featureless black. The fleet, a lonely convoy of 50 battered warships, sailed through a nothingness so profound it felt like a physical pressure against the hulls. For weeks. The only light came from the ships themselves, casting ghostly glows that were immediately swallowed by the oppressive dark. Aboard the Stellaris' Lament, a new, solemn routine took hold. The crew, once driven by the hot fire of vengeance, were now animated by a colder, heavier sense of duty. They were no longer soldiers on a punitive expedition. They were guardians sailing into the heart of a cosmic horror story, and the weight of that responsibility was a palpable presence on the bridge. Eris Thorn had become the reluctant high priestess of this new mission. The Glimmer's dying echo still resonated in her mind, a constant, low-frequency hum that had evolved from a chaotic storm of data into a coherent, if terrifying, stream of consciousness. She spent her days in the ship's xenolinguistics lab with Ariadne, trying to decipher the deeper layers of the Glimmer's warning. The name, the Architects of Silence, was more than just a designation. It was a description of their function. They were not mere destroyers. They were editors of reality, beings who perceived the noisy, chaotic evolution of life as a flaw in the universe's otherwise perfect, silent code. The Glimmer had been their firewall, a self-perpetuating system designed to delete any civilization that made too much noise. And the firing of the Graviton Lance had been the loudest shout in the history of the galaxy. The Glimmer's final transmission contained more than just a warning. Eris explained to Commander Valerius during one of their nightly strategy sessions. They stood before a holographic display showing a swirling, complex fractal pattern, Ariadne's best attempt at visualizing the architect's nature. It contained a history, not of themselves, but of their masters. The architects are not from our universe. They are refugees from a previous cosmic cycle, a universe that collapsed under the weight of its own complexity. They survived by becoming one with the fundamental silence, the absolute zero of existence. They see our universe, with its constant expansion and creation, as a disease, a recurrence of the chaos that destroyed their home. Valerius stared at the impossible geometry of the hologram. So they're not just sleeping. They're waiting. They're hibernating, Eris corrected, waiting for the universe to run its course and return to the cold, silent equilibrium they consider to be perfection. But our existence, our technology, our ambition is accelerating the universe's energy output. We are, in their view, a cancer. The graviton lance was the equivalent of a stage 4 diagnosis. The psychic hum in Eris's head suddenly spiked, and she winced, pressing her fingers to her temples. They're close, Commander. I can feel them. The destination was not a star system or a nebula, but a patch of void designated on the Glimmer's star charts as the Lacuna. It was a region of space so utterly devoid of matter and energy that it defied the known laws of physics. As the fleet approached, their instruments began to fail in bizarre and unsettling ways. Time itself seemed to warp, with shipboard chronometers falling out of sync. Navigational sensors reported their position as both here and a light year away simultaneously. The very fabric of reality was becoming frayed at the edges. Lieutenant Yorvin, his face perpetually etched with worry, turned from his console. General, I can't get a stable fix on our position. Space-time in this region is inconsistent. It's like the universe has a hole in it. That's because it does, Ari said, her voice a low whisper. She was staring at the main view screen, which showed only an impenetrable, perfect blackness. But in her mind, fed by the Glimmer's echo, she saw what the ship's sensors could not. She saw a tomb. We're here, she announced. At her command, the fleet came to a halt, a silent, invisible armada hanging on the precipice of nothing. The lacuna was not empty. It was filled with a structure so vast and so black, it was indistinguishable from the void itself. It did not reflect light. It absorbed it. It did not have mass in the conventional sense. It simply was. The Glimmer's data called it the monolith, a prison tomb built not of matter, but of solidified, compressed space-time. It was a place where the laws of physics were suspended, a cage designed to hold a sleeping god. Ariadne, can you get a reading on the structure? Valerius asked, his voice tight. Negative. Commander, the AI replied. The object is dimensionally incongruous. It does not exist within our four-dimensional framework in a way that can be measured. It is, for all intents and purposes, a physical paradox. As if in response to their proximity, the psychic hum in Eris's head intensified into a roar. It was no longer a message. It was a presence. A vast, cold, and ancient consciousness was beginning to stir within the monolith, roused from its eons-long slumber by the lingering shockwave of the graviton lance. The fleet's stealth systems began to flicker. Consoles sparked. On the bridge of the Lament, the lights flickered and died, plunging them into a terrifying absolute darkness, broken only by the red glow of emergency alerts. The architect was waking up. "It knows we're here," Valerius stated, his hand instinctively going to the sidearm at his hip, a useless gesture against an enemy that could unmake reality. "It's not just waking up, Commander," Eris said, her voice trembling as the alien consciousness pressed in on her mind, sifting through her thoughts, her memories, her grief. "It's communicating." The voice that spoke was not a sound, but a feeling. It was the cold of absolute zero, the weight of infinite gravity, the dizzying vertigo of non-existence. It echoed not in their ears, but in the deepest, most primal parts of their minds. Who dares disturb the silence? The psychic shout was so powerful it cracked the reinforced plasteel of the view screen. Crew members cried out, clutching their heads as their minds were assaulted by concepts no human brain was meant to contain. Valerius gritted his teeth, sweat beading on his forehead. "General, what are your orders?" Eris fought against the overwhelming mental pressure, focusing on the cold, hard core of her grief, the memory of her sister, the face of her nephew. That grief, once a source of pain, was now her anchor in the storm. She pushed back against the architect's psychic assault with a single, defiant thought, a message of pure, unadulterated human will. "We are humanity, and you're in our way." The architect's psychic presence recoiled, not in pain, but in what felt like surprise. It was an emotion so ancient and alien it was almost unrecognizable. Humanity, the thought echoed, laced with a cold, analytical curiosity. The resonance cascade, the flaw. You were to be erased. The gardeners failed. The gardeners are gone. Aris broadcast, not with the ship's comms, but with her own mind, using the glimmer's echo as a carrier wave. "We destroyed them, and now we've come for you." There was a long, cold pause. The pressure on their minds receded slightly, replaced by a sense of vast, unhurried amusement. "You cannot destroy silence. Flaw! You are a fleeting noise. I am the void in which all noise dies. Your weapon, the one that rang the bell. It can unmake space-time. But I am not of space-time. I am what came before." The surface of the monolith began to shift. The perfect, featureless blackness fractured, not with light, but with cracks of deeper, more absolute darkness. Shapes began to emerge from the tomb, things that were not ships, but geometric impossibilities, constructs of solidified nothingness that moved with a silent, terrifying grace. They were the architect's antibodies, its immune system, sent to cleanse the infection of the human fleet. "Enemy contacts," Desai yelled, her hands flying over her console. I can't get a lock on them. They don't have a heat signature, no mass, no energy reading. They're not there." "They are there," Eris said, her eyes wide with a terrible understanding. "They're not made of matter. They are null space entities, wholes in reality given form and purpose. The null space constructs swarmed the fleet. They did not fire weapons. They simply passed through the human ships. Wherever they made contact, matter ceased to exist. A destroyer, the HFS Dauntless, was struck by one of the swirling, geometric shapes. A perfect spherical chunk of its midsection vanished, leaving the two halves of the ship to drift apart in the silent void, its crew exposed to the hard vacuum. There was no explosion, no fire, just a clean, surgical erasure. The fleet returned fire, a desperate, brilliant fusillade of plasma torpedoes and kinetic slugs. The weapons passed straight through the null space entities, having no effect. They were trying to shoot holes in a shadow. Panic began to grip the fleet. They were being dismantled, piece by piece, by an enemy they could not see, could not track, and could not harm. Valerius turned to Eris, his face a mask of grim resolve. "General, we can't fight them. Our weapons are useless." "I know," Eris said, her mind racing. The Glimmer's echo was providing her with a desperate, half-formed idea, a strategy born from the final, terrified thoughts of a dying intelligence. The Glimmer couldn't fight them either. That's why they built the quarantine. They didn't defeat the architects. They just hid the universe from them. But they left behind a contingency, a final, desperate protocol. She looked at the Graviton Lance controls, still glowing with residual energy. The architects are not of our space-time. Our weapons can't touch them because they don't truly exist in our reality. But the Graviton Lance doesn't fire matter or energy. It fires a wave of pure space-time distortion. It can't kill them, but it might be able to push them back. "Your noise is annoying," the architect's voice boomed in their minds. "It is time for silence." The monolith itself began to expand, the solidified space-time of the prison tomb unfurling like a black flower. The sleeping god was not just waking up, it was breaking free. The entire lacuna began to collapse, the hole in the universe widening, threatening to consume the fleet and everything in it. "Valerius, get us out of here," Aris commanded. "All ships, full retreat. I need to buy us some time." She rerouted the Graviton Lance's power controls to her own command chair, while the fleet turned to flee the collapsing reality. The Stellarch's lament turned to face the unfurling god machine. "What are you doing?" Valerius demanded. "We can't destroy it." "I'm not trying to destroy it," Eris said, her fingers flying across the controls, inputting a complex series of firing sequences drawn directly from the Glimmer's echo. "I'm trying to rewrite the song. The Glimmer used resonance to maintain the quarantine. I'm going to use the lance to create a new one. A dissonant chord so loud and so violent it will force the architect back into hibernation." The Graviton Lance began to power up, but this time it was not for a single, focused blast. It was preparing to fire a sustained, oscillating wave of space-time distortion, a continuous scream of cosmic feedback designed to disrupt the architect's very presence in their reality. "It's going to tear the ship apart," Valerius shouted over the wail of the overloading core. "I know," Eris replied, her eyes fixed on the expanding monolith. She thought of the Odyssey, of the silent, perfect sphere of blackness where her family had died. The Glimmer had used silence to create a tomb. She was about to use noise to build a cage. The architect, sensing her intent, focused its immense will on the lone ship. "The flaw will be corrected. The silence will be absolute." "Not today," Aris whispered, and fired. The universe screamed. It was not a sound that could be heard, but a vibration that tore at the very soul of existence. The Graviton Lance, pushed far beyond its designed limits, unleashed not a focused beam of destruction, but a chaotic, cascading wave of pure space-time dissonance. It was a chord of cosmic wrongness, a sustained roar of anti-reality that slammed into the expanding monolith. The effect was not one of destruction, but of profound and violent disharmony. The architect's null space constructs, The elegant, geometric antibodies of the void flickered and dissolved. They could not exist in a reality that was actively tearing itself apart. The unfurling black flower of the monolith recoiled, its expansion halting as the lance's chaotic resonance wave disrupted the delicate balance of its trans-dimensional state. The architect, a being of perfect, ordered silence, was being assaulted by the loudest, most discordant noise the universe could produce. On the bridge of the Stellarsh's lament, the world had dissolved into a hell of screaming alarms and groaning metal. The ship was at the epicenter of its own reality quake, and it was dying. Hull plates buckled, entire decks collapsing under the impossible gravitational stresses. Consoles exploded in showers of sparks. The air crackled with raw, untamed energy. Commander Valerius, bracing himself against a bulkhead, watched as Eris Thorne, strapped into her command chair, became a conduit for the storm. Her eyes glowed with the reflected light of the lance's vortex, her body rigid, her mind locked in a silent, desperate battle of wills with the waking god. She was not just firing a weapon, she was conducting an orchestra of chaos, shaping the lance's output with the fragmented knowledge of the glimmer, forcing the architect's perfect, silent song into a feedback loop of shrieking static. "Cease your noise." Flaw, the architect's psychic roar, boomed, weaker now, laced with something that felt like pain, or perhaps the alien equivalent of irritation. It was an intelligence of pure logic and order, and the sheer, unstructured chaos of the Graviton Lance was anathema to its very being. Eris pushed back, her mind a fortress of grief and defiance. "You took my family," she thought, the memory of her sister and nephew a burning star in the chaos. "You took 250,000 souls and called it gardening. You will not have my species. You will not have this universe." The lament gave a final, shuddering groan. A massive crack splintered across the bridge's main view screen, and the ship's AI, Ariadne, spoke for the last time, its voice distorted by the collapsing power grid. "Structural integrity, critical. Core breach, imminent. Goodbye, General." The ship was coming apart around them, but the Graviton Lance held its note. The monolith, unable to withstand the sustained psychic and physical dissonance, began to contract. The unfurling petals of solidified spacetime folded back in on themselves, the cracks of absolute darkness sealing over. The architect was retreating, pulling its consciousness back from the chaos of their reality, seeking the cold, ordered safety of its prison tomb. It was choosing to go back to sleep. "It's working," Valerius yelled over the din. "The monolith is closing." But Eris knew it wasn't enough. Forcing the architect back into hibernation would only delay the inevitable. As long as the monolith existed, as long as the sleeper dreamed, the threat would remain. The glimmer's warning had been clear. The architects could not be destroyed, only contained. But the glimmer had been guardians, not warriors. They had lacked one crucial element that defined humanity: the willingness to sacrifice everything for a future they would never see. "Valerius," Eris said, her voice strained but clear, her eyes never leaving the contracting monolith. "Get the crew to the escape pods. That's an order." "I'm not leaving you, General." He protested. "You are," she countered, a grim finality in her tone. "Humanity needs to know what we found here. They need to know what's sleeping in the dark. You will be their warning. You will be their memory." She looked at him, her face illuminated by the dying light of the bridge, and, for a fleeting moment, The cold strategist was gone, replaced by the grieving sister, the reluctant guardian of a universe she had only just begun to understand. Tell them we held the line. The psychic hum in her head, the glimmer's echo, was fading, its knowledge spent, its purpose fulfilled. In its place, a new, terrible idea was forming, a final, desperate gambit born of human ingenuity and sheer, bloody-minded stubbornness. She began to reconfigure the Graviton Lance, overriding every safety protocol, channeling the entire output of the ship's dying core into one final, impossible burst. She was no longer trying to create a wave of dissonance. She was trying to collapse a star that wasn't there. Valerius, seeing the madness and the genius of her plan in her eyes, finally understood. He gave a sharp, grief-stricken nod, then turned and began to bellow orders, herding the surviving bridge crew towards the emergency exits. He was the last one to leave, pausing at the threshold to look back at the woman who had led them into the heart of the void. It was an honor, General Thorne. Eris gave a faint, tired smile. The honor was all mine, Commander. As the blast doors sealed, she was alone. The Stellarch's lament, the ghost ship built for vengeance, was now a funeral pyre, and she was its pilot. With the last of her strength, she focused the Graviton Lance on the now sealed monolith. The architect was dormant again, its consciousness withdrawn into the silent safety of its prison. But Eris was not aiming for the architect. She was aiming for the prison itself. The lance fired its final shot. It was not a wave, but a point. A single, perfect, concentrated point of space-time collapse, aimed directly at the heart of the dimensionally incongruous tomb. The monolith, a structure that existed outside of conventional physics, could not be destroyed by conventional means, but it could be moved. The lance's final pulse created a contained, artificial singularity. It did not explode. It pulled. The monolith, the vast prison tomb of the sleeping god, was caught in the irresistible gravity of the man-made black hole. It began to slide, not through space, but out of it, pulled sideways into a pocket dimension, a fold in reality from which there was no escape. Eris had not destroyed the cage. She had locked it and thrown away the universe. As the Stellarch's lament finally succumbed, its core breaching in a silent, brilliant flash of light, Eris Thorne's consciousness was, for a fleeting moment, one with the void. She felt the monolith slip from their reality, its psychic presence vanishing forever. She felt the escape pods of her crew, tiny sparks of life, accelerating away into the darkness, carrying her warning back toward the distant, hopeful light of home. And in the final microsecond before her own existence was unmade, she felt a profound and unexpected sense of peace. The universe did not scream when the HFS Stellarch's lament died. It simply went quiet. But this time, it was not the silence of erasure. It was the silence of a watchman's duty fulfilled, the silence of a line held against an encroaching, infinite dark. Far away, the scattered escape pods of the Retribution fleet began their long, lonely journey home. They carried no victory flags, no tales of glorious conquest. They carried only a memory and a warning. They carried the story of Eris Thorne, the diplomat who became a warrior, the academic who stared into the abyss and forced it to blink. Humanity would now know the truth of the cosmos, that the universe was not empty, but haunted, and that their survival depended not on their strength, but on their vigilance. They had sought retribution, a memento mori for their enemy. Instead, they had found a new purpose. They had become the new gardeners, the new guardians. They had learned the terrible price of silence, and they would spend the rest of their existence ensuring that humanity's defiant, chaotic, and beautiful noise would never again be silenced. The age of expansion was over. The age of the Watch had begun.